When I first moved into the neighborhood, the oak tree in my front yard was what sealed the deal. The house itself was lovely, early 20th century craftsman style with a wide porch and a view of the hills. But it was the enormous, twisting canopy of the 100-year-old oak that truly made the place feel like home. It towered over everything, its roots deep and spread out beneath my lawn like ancient fingers, holding onto the earth. In summer, it shaded the entire block. In autumn, it exploded into gold and orange flames. Kids loved climbing it. Birds built entire communities in its branches. My grandfather, who grew up in the house, once told me it survived 2 tornadoes and a lightning strike. "That tree's stronger than most people," he said. I believed him. And for years, no one had a problem with it, until Karen moved in. Karen came into the neighborhood like a corporate storm in yoga pants. She introduced herself with a clipboard in one hand and a catalog of the HOA regulations in the other. "We like things neat around here," she said on day one, scanning my porch as if she were assessing a crime scene. I humored her at first. I even trimmed the shrubs after she left a note on my door saying they looked unruly. But then she set her sights on the tree. It started innocently enough. She left another one of her cheerful yet ominous notes. "Hi neighbor, that oak tree in your front yard is beautiful, but I'm concerned it may not meet our visual conformity standards." Visual conformity standards? For a tree that predates the HOA itself? I laughed it off, but she wasn't joking. Within 2 weeks, I got a formal notice from the HOA. Due to ongoing concerns about safety, aesthetics, and neighborhood cohesion, the board requests the removal of the oak tree located at my address. The notice cited obscure bylaws about overgrown vegetation, limb encroachment, and non-standard front yard appearances. I called the number listed, assuming there had been some kind of mistake. There wasn't. Karen had submitted multiple complaints, signed, dated, and attached with photos, claiming the tree cast excessive shadow, dropped debris onto sidewalks, and encouraged wildlife congregation. Encouraged wildlife congregation. As if the squirrels had been holding raves in the branches, I attended the next HOA meeting out of sheer curiosity. It was a mix of bored retirees, passive-aggressive bakers, and Karen sitting at the head of the table like she was chairing the Senate. When the floor opened to concerns, Karen immediately launched into a tirade about my tree. She used words like visual blight, danger to property values, and a possible nesting ground for invasive species. I asked for specifics. She pointed to a single squirrel chewing on an acorn and said, "That one looks suspiciously large." I nearly fell out of my chair. Still, the board was split. Some members nodded along with Karen. Others looked vaguely embarrassed. I left the meeting more confused than angry, thinking surely common sense would prevail. After all, who declares war on a tree that's been standing for a century? But then Karen doubled down. She sent out a neighborhood-wide email titled "Safety in the Shade," a discussion about unchecked trees. It included manipulated photos of fallen branches from who knows where, a made-up stat about declining home values, and a poll asking if my tree should be removed for the greater good. The results weren't even close. 92% voted to leave it alone. But Karen wasn't finished. She reported the tree to the city, claimed it was diseased and structurally unsound, claimed it leaned too far, dropped too many acorns, and was responsible for a cracked sidewalk 2 doors down. The city inspector showed up, clipboard in hand, looked at the tree for about 10 seconds and told me, "This is one of the healthiest old oaks I've seen in years." I smiled and offered him lemonade. He took 2 cups. Still, the harassment didn't stop. Karen started walking her dog in slow circles around my property, camera in hand, hoping to catch the tree committing some act of botanical violence. When it rained, she stood on her porch glaring at the leaves as if they'd personally insulted her. One day I caught her measuring the shadow length with a tape measure. When I asked what she was doing, she muttered, "Just gathering evidence." I said, "For what? Photosynthesis?" She didn't laugh. That's when I knew she wasn't just being petty. She was obsessed. This tree represented something she couldn't control. It didn't fit her checklist. It didn't bend to bylaws. It grew how it wanted, shed when it wanted, stood where it pleased. It was a living reminder that not everything could be forced into conformity. And Karen couldn't handle that. She saw it as a threat to her HOA reign. So I made a decision. I was going to protect that tree. not just because it was beautiful, not just because it was mine, but because Karen wanted it gone. And that meant it needed to stay. If I thought Karen's obsession with my oak tree had peaked with measuring shadows and wildlife congregation theories, I severely underestimated her capacity for absurdity. The following week, I found a bright orange tag tied around the tree trunk with caution tape and a laminated HOA notice staked into my yard. In bold lettering, it read, "Pending removal, Community Safety Enforcement." It looked like something from a disaster zone. I stood there for 5 full minutes, coffee going cold in my hand, trying to process the sheer audacity. Karen had unilaterally marked my 100-year-old tree for destruction. No vote, no warning, just a self-appointed crusade fueled by paranoia and a misplaced sense of order. I ripped the notice down and immediately fired off an email to the HOA board. 2 members responded quickly, apologizing and assuring me no formal decision had been made. Karen took initiative, one of them admitted, but she didn't follow protocol. That would have been enough for a reasonable person to back off. But Karen doubled down. She began a full-fledged campaign she titled Operation Canopy Clear. She started canvassing the neighborhood with flyers that looked like PSAs. Is your street safe from falling limbs? And one tree's beauty is another home's insurance risk. She included stock images of storm damage and claimed they came from similar neighborhood hazards. The irony? We hadn't had a storm in 6 months. She petitioned the HOA again. She delivered a multi-page report to the city, now citing leaf buildup as a documented trip hazard. When those efforts didn't work, she started hosting porch meetings, inviting neighbors over for lemonade and passive-aggressive presentations on the dangers of unmanaged arboreal growth. She brought in a so-called tree risk assessor she found on Craigslist, who wasn't certified and visibly scared of squirrels. He stood under the tree for 10 seconds, poked the bark with a stick, and said, "Yeah, looks old. Could fall, maybe." Karen acted like she'd brought in a UN weapons inspector. But perhaps her most outrageous move came during a neighborhood block party. While kids played tag and neighbors roasted hot dogs, Karen rolled out a mounted poster board titled The Hidden Threat. It featured photos of my tree from different angles, with dramatic red arrows pointing to potential fall zones, shade encroachment, and a circled squirrel labeled Possible Disease Vector. She stood next to it with a laser pointer, explaining how roots were undermining soil integrity and how shadow dominance could lead to depressive moods in nearby homes. That was the actual phrase she used, shadow dominance. Greg from 3 doors down nearly spit out his beer laughing. Everyone was tired of her, but no one was willing to confront her directly. People feared retaliation. Karen had been on the HOA board for years, and despite her insanity, she knew how to bury people in red tape. One woman whispered to me, she fined me $100 for drying clothes outside. She called it visual laundry pollution. Another man said she reported his kid's lemonade stand for operating without a license. It wasn't just about trees anymore. Karen was a tyrant hiding behind bylaws, and my oak tree had become the banner in her latest conquest. She began sending me daily notices, sometimes twice a day. Tree debris must be cleared within 24 hours. Report root expansion to HOA maintenance department. Visible moss accumulation exceeds acceptable levels. I created a folder called Karen Spam and watched it grow faster than the actual tree. I knew the HOA was getting tired of her antics, but she was relentless. She'd show up unannounced with her measuring tape, or a clipboard, or her signature scowl, always pretending to be on official business. I once caught her pointing her phone at the tree during golden hour, trying to photograph the branches to make them look menacing. They looked like a painting. Karen claimed they resembled gnarled claws of structural doom. The final straw came when she hired a private contractor to deliver a quote without my permission. I came home to find 2 men in reflective vests and a chainsaw parked in my driveway, arguing over where to place the equipment. When I asked who sent them, they said, "We're here about the HOA order to remove the tree." I nearly choked. I called the HOA president on the spot. "That's impossible," he said. "We never approved anything." When I told him who signed the work order, he groaned. "Let me guess, Karen?" She'd forged a removal request, or at the very least disguised it in a flurry of vague paperwork and assumed no one would question her. She'd taken her crusade from harassment to sabotage, and that's when I knew I couldn't just defend the tree, I had to protect it permanently. Karen wanted to remove what she saw as a nuisance. I would turn it into something untouchable, something bigger than her, something sacred. I would make it a historic landmark. I wasn't going to let Karen win, not after she forged a fake removal order, slandered my tree at a block party, and turned what was once a peaceful neighborhood fixture into her personal obsession. I realized that if I wanted this war to end once and for all, I needed to go beyond defense. I had to turn my oak tree into something she couldn't touch, couldn't regulate, and most importantly, couldn't remove without committing a federal offense. So I got to work. The first thing I did was research, deep, exhaustive, rabbit hole level research. I learned more about city ordinances, tree protection laws, and landmark designation criteria than I ever thought possible. I scoured zoning maps, historical archives, and urban planning records. I spent hours at the public library, poring through dusty neighborhood development books, and even found a microfiche copy of a 1928 article in the local paper mentioning the great oak on Maple Drive, whose limbs stretch wide like welcoming arms. Bingo, it wasn't just a tree, it was history. I contacted a certified arborist, not a Craigslist amateur, but a real deal, licensed, city-approved expert with a PhD in urban forestry. He came out, inspected the tree, and gave me a glowing report. Structurally sound, disease-free, and a textbook specimen of Quercus rubra. That's red oak for those who aren't knee-deep in tree law. He even included a note stating it had an estimated age of 105 years and was one of the most mature and well-preserved examples he'd seen in the region. That report was step one. Step two was talking to City Hall. Turns out there's a specific committee dedicated to historic preservation, and they weren't just interested in buildings, they cared about monuments, plaques, and yes, trees. I set up a meeting, brought Duke, the dog from my previous story, for emotional support and made my case. I presented the arborist's report, the newspaper clipping, and a petition I had quietly circulated around the neighborhood, which included over 40 signatures in favor of landmarking the tree. The committee was impressed. "This is one of the most thorough submissions we've seen," one of them said. "Most people just send photos and beg us not to bulldoze something." I smiled. I wasn't begging, I was winning. But it didn't stop there. I dug deeper, and that's when I found gold. My grandfather had taken part in a World War II victory parade that passed right under that tree. I found a photo in an old family album. Black and white, grainy, but unmistakable. There was the street, lined with flags, soldiers marching proudly, and right above them, my oak tree in full bloom. I submitted the photo to the committee as supplemental material. It hit them like a ton of historic bricks. Suddenly, this wasn't just a healthy tree. It was a living relic of community history connected to patriotism, legacy, and neighborhood identity. The Preservation Committee fast-tracked my application. While that process moved forward, I prepped for war at home. I installed a camera pointed directly at the tree, just in case Karen tried another stunt. I also posted a laminated sign on the trunk that read, "This tree is under review for landmark status. Tampering may result in civil penalties." It wasn't legally binding yet, but it looked very official. The effect was immediate. Karen's daily patrols became less frequent. Her measuring tapes disappeared. She stopped glaring at it, but I could tell it wasn't over. Then I got wind that Karen was preparing her own counter document. She was working on a community risk report, which she planned to present to the city in opposition. Her evidence? Fallen leaves. That's it. She had photos of piles of leaves and one squirrel she claimed looked suspiciously aggressive. I knew what I had to do. Go public. I emailed the neighborhood, the whole neighborhood. Subject line, "Help me save our tree." I explained everything. The history, the inspection, the attempted unauthorized removal, the landmark application. I attached photos, documents, the veteran parade snapshot, even a video of Duke barking proudly under the branches like a loyal sentinel. The response was overwhelming. People started sending me stories. One man said he'd carved his initials into the trunk in 1983. Another woman told me her parents met under that tree at a block party in the 60s. Greg posted a poll in the neighborhood group. Should the tree be preserved? 91% voted yes. Karen lost it. She sent out her own blast email titled, "The tree is not sacred. It's a menace." In it, she accused me of manipulating the neighborhood with emotion-based propaganda and called Duke a canine distraction from real issues. That was a tactical error. No one insults Duke and walks away clean. The backlash was immediate. Someone responded with a meme of Duke in a graduation cap that read, "Too smart for Karen's nonsense." Another neighbor posted a photo of the tree with the caption, "This is why I moved here." Karen went silent. Finally, the day came. I received a letter from the city preservation office. The oak had been unanimously approved for historic landmark status. I was stunned. I read it 3 times. It had a seal, a case number, and even a clause stating that the tree was now protected under municipal ordinance. Any attempt to alter, trim, or remove it without a permit would be met with hefty fines and potential civil charges. I laughed so hard I nearly fell off the porch. I framed the letter and hung it above my fireplace. Then I laminated a copy and posted it directly onto the sign in my yard. In all caps, "This tree is a designated historic landmark. Violators will be prosecuted." Have a nice day. Karen saw it 2 hours later. Her mouth dropped. She looked at the tree, then at me, then back at the tree like it had personally betrayed her. And maybe it had. Because now, no matter how many emails she sent, how many shadows she measured, or how many squirrels she photographed, the tree was untouchable. And Karen was just another bitter resident with no power. By the time the official plaque arrived in the mail, I was already planning the ceremony. Yes, ceremony. You don't just win a war like this and keep it quiet. Karen had spent months waging a full-scale clipboard and complaint war on my oak tree, and now that it was legally protected by the city, it was time to let the whole neighborhood celebrate its victory. I mounted the bronze plaque onto a polished cedar post and installed it right in front of the tree. It read, "The Maple Drive Oak, established circa 1918, protected historic landmark." Below that, I had the city's case number and a small line of text. In honor of history, community, and common sense, I invited the neighborhood. Over 30 people showed up. Greg brought folding chairs, someone brought cupcakes shaped like acorns, and little kids drew pictures of the tree with crayons. I gave a short speech about legacy, about the importance of protecting what matters, and, without naming names, about the dangers of overreach. The crowd clapped. Duke barked once, like punctuation. It was beautiful, a moment of suburban unity, sealed by shade and shared pettiness. Karen, of course, watched from behind her curtains. She didn't come outside, but we all knew she was there. You could feel her eyes twitching every time someone took a selfie with the plaque. The real victory, though, wasn't the ceremony. It was in what came after. The moment that plaque was installed, the tree stopped being a piece of landscaping and became law. Karen had lost, but in true Karen fashion, she didn't accept it gracefully. The very next day, she filed a formal complaint with the HOA board, claiming that I had improperly leveraged municipal resources for personal landscaping glorification. She actually used those words. I framed that letter too, next to the plaque inside my house. The HOA board, however, had already started to fracture. Karen's antics over the tree, combined with her growing reputation as a serial complainer, had left most members exhausted. Her motion was ignored. In fact, not long after the tree was landmarked, the board quietly revised several policies to limit individual authority in making enforcement decisions. They didn't mention Karen by name, but everyone knew. One board member privately messaged me saying, "Thank you for saving the tree, and also for saving the rest of us from her." Victory tasted sweet, like bark dust and iced tea. But Karen didn't stop there. Oh no, she tried appealing the landmark status with the City Preservation Committee. She showed up to a public hearing with a stack of binders, each labeled Oak Tree Impact Report, filled with doctored photos and dramatic testimonials, none of which were signed. She accused the arborist of bias, the committee of favoritism, and me of weaponizing municipal pride. The committee let her speak for 7 full minutes, then cut her off and asked if she had any legal basis for reversal. She didn't. Appeal denied. From there, Karen spiraled. She started making vague accusations in the neighborhood Facebook group, claiming that I was bribing city officials with lemonade, that my dog had been trained to bark in code, and that the tree somehow violated EMF exposure guidelines. No one responded, not even her old allies. Her credibility was toast. The HOA, once terrified of her emails, began publicly ignoring her. A new family moved in next door and told me, "She came over with a packet of noise concerns. We threw it out. I offered them lemonade. They accepted." Meanwhile, the tree thrived. I hired a local artist to install solar-powered uplighting so that at night, the trunk and limbs glowed like something out of a fantasy novel. People came by just to see it. Couples took engagement photos under it. Someone proposed beneath its branches. I got thank you cards. One guy taped a handwritten haiku to the base of the plaque. "Strong limbs stretch wide here. Shade softens the harshest light. Karen stands no chance." And Karen? She got quieter. For the first time since she moved in, she started walking her dog on different streets. The glare from her windows faded. The number of complaint emails dropped. Her presence shrank from HOA overlord to occasional mutterer behind hedges. The more the tree blossomed, the more Karen withered. The ultimate irony? The value of the neighborhood increased after the landmark designation. The city even included the tree in its historical walking tour. Realtors started referencing it in listings. One house on our block sold in 3 days, with the listing calling it steps away from the historic maple oak, one of the most iconic natural landmarks in the city. Karen didn't even try to fight it. What could she say? I tried to destroy that tree once and failed spectacularly. She was done, but I wasn't, because now that the tree was protected, I had even bigger plans. Plans that would ensure no HOA dictator, now or in the future, would ever touch another living thing on my property again. By the time summer rolled around, the tree had transcended its role as just a tree. It had become something more, a monument, a rallying point, a leafy symbol of community sanity in the face of HOA tyranny. I didn't plan it that way. I never wanted to become the poster child for neighborhood rebellion. But once Karen tried to erase a century of bark and history for the sake of visual conformity, she lit a fuse she couldn't put out. The Maple Drive oak became a celebrity. A photo of it appeared in the local paper under the headline, "Historic Tree Stands Tall Against HOA Drama." A radio show interviewed me live on air, asking what inspired me to push for landmark status. I said, "Honestly?" One very persistent woman with a clipboard. They burst out laughing. But the impact on the neighborhood was where it truly mattered. People stopped being afraid. For years, Karen had ruled with passive-aggressive notes, weaponized bylaws, and whispered threats. Her grip had gone unquestioned. But after the tree, after she lost to a giant, unmoving piece of nature, she thought she could bend to her will. The fear shattered. Residents who once hid behind silence began speaking out. A neighbor named Denise, who'd been fined for hanging her laundry on a line, openly started drying it again, on 2 lines. One man removed the HOA-mandated shrubs in his front yard and planted wildflowers instead. Someone even installed a plastic flamingo wearing a t-shirt that read, "Tree Hugger." Karen tried to regain her footing. She began pushing a new initiative she called Neighborhood Renewal, framing it as an effort to re-establish visual cohesion. It was just another attempt to claw back control. She sent out glossy pamphlets with suspiciously photoshopped images of ideal curb appeal, all suspiciously missing one very specific tree. She proposed new yard inspection policies at the next HOA meeting and tried to introduce a clause that would prohibit unregistered ornaments of community significance. The wording was vague, but everyone knew. It was about the tree. But this time, the board didn't just ignore her, they openly mocked her. One member said, "Is this about the oak again? Because I just had my anniversary dinner under it." Another said, "I gave a tour to city reps last week. They loved it." The proposal didn't just fail, It sparked laughter. Karen left the meeting early. That was the last time she ever tried to pass a motion. Meanwhile, the tree's influence kept growing. Someone built a small circular bench around its trunk. Volunteers helped install fairy lights that twinkled each evening like stars tangled in branches. Kids came after school and read books beneath it. Couples had picnics. People started calling it the Commons, short for Common Sense Tree, a nickname that stuck after someone tied a laminated card to the bark that read, "This tree outlasted the HOA's nonsense." A local artist painted a mural of the tree on the community rec center. Above it, she scrawled in bold looping script, "Stand strong, grow anyway." Karen couldn't walk past without muttering something about vandals. No one listened. She had lost not just the battle, but the war, and the territory. Even the city honored it. A small ceremony was held where a council member presented me with a certificate thanking me for preserving natural history and promoting community engagement. I made a short speech. Duke sat beside me, tongue lolling, tail thumping. Karen didn't attend. She stood across the street, arms folded, watching everything like a cartoon villain who got written out of her own show. But the final backfire, the moment that sealed her fate, came in the form of a letter. Not from me, not from the city, from the new family who bought the house next to hers. They were teachers, newly married, sweet as pie. They wrote a neighborhood-wide open letter that read, "We moved here because of the community spirit, because of the tree, because it made us feel like this neighborhood had roots. Thank you for preserving it. We look forward to raising our kids in its shade." The response was overwhelming. People cried. They printed the letter in the next HOA bulletin. And beside it, a photo of the tree in spring, branches bursting with green, birds nesting, sunlight flooding through like it had personally forgiven the entire neighborhood for Karen. After that, Karen's behavior changed. The blinds stayed shut longer. The yard, once manicured to the millimeter, grew a little overgrown. The clipboard disappeared. So did the notes. The woman who once tried to strip the street of its soul with bylaws and shadow tape measures had become a ghost. Rumors spread. She was looking to sell. Maybe move somewhere more orderly, somewhere with rules, somewhere with less history. I heard she toured a gated community with synthetic lawns and standardized mailboxes. Fitting. And the tree, still standing, still growing, still winning. Karen's house officially went up for sale one crisp October morning, the kind of day when the maple drive oak turned into an explosion of gold and fire-red leaves that danced in the wind like it was celebrating something. The listing used phrases like classic colonial home with excellent bones, well-maintained exterior, and quiet neighborhood. But the photo they used featured the tree in the background, towering, majestic, completely unmoved by the months of war it had weathered. I laughed for a full minute. The tree Karen had tried so desperately to destroy was now literally helping her property's market appeal. That, right there, was cosmic justice with roots. Her departure was anticlimactic. No farewell party, no neighbors coming to say goodbye. The moving truck arrived early and left before sundown. She didn't speak to anyone. The last thing she did before pulling out of her driveway was scowl out her window at the tree one final time. She didn't wave. Duke, lying at the base of the oak as he often did, watched her go with a calm, tongue-lolling stare, as if to say, "Good riddance, Karen." After she was gone, the neighborhood changed in subtle but powerful ways. The HOA restructured completely. A new board was elected, people who actually cared about building community instead of enforcing it with threats and passive-aggressive flyers. They revised the bylaws too. Gone were vague rules about visual conformity and shade encroachment. In their place were updated, fair standards built around flexibility and actual resident input. There was even a tree preservation clause added, unanimously approved, that protected large, mature trees unless proven to be truly hazardous. They named it informally the Oak Act, and the wording included a tongue-in-cheek line that said, "In honor of the landmark tree that reminded us all to chill out." The maple drive oak became the unofficial town mascot. It showed up in local calendars, real estate brochures, even a bumper sticker someone made that read, "I break for historic trees." Greg hosted a block party that spring called Oakapalooza, complete with food trucks, live music, and a commemorative trivia contest about the tree's history. Duke wore a green bandana that said "Tree Security." Kids got temporary tattoos with tiny acorns and hashtag "Stand Tall" written on them. Tourists sometimes stopped by. One couple from out of town asked if they could take engagement photos under the branches. I said yes, of course, provided they didn't mind a very photogenic golden retriever in the background. They said, "He's part of the charm." The city put up a small directional sign at the corner that said, "Historic Maple Oak." Walking tour stop number 4. The most surprising moment came a year later when the local elementary school hosted a naming contest for their new library wing. The students voted to name it the Shade Room, in honor of the tree that taught grown-ups how to be better neighbors. I attended the ribbon cutting. They handed me a miniature plaque with the same wording. I hung it on the porch beside the full-size version. As for me, I went back to my quiet life. The lawn stayed messy in the fall because I refused to rake religiously. I planted wildflowers under the oak's canopy. I added a bird feeder that attracted more wildlife congregation, just to spite Karen's original complaint. Duke took naps there almost daily, and every now and then, I'd sit under that massive trunk with a drink in hand, staring up through the branches that had stood tall through a century of change, storms, families, laughter, and yes, one woman's hilarious failure to erase it. I never planned to become a landmark activist. I didn't think I'd end up in city meetings or reading bylaws by candlelight or turning a single tree into a local symbol of rebellion. But Karen forced my hand. She brought a clipboard to a centuries-old oak fight, and she lost. Badly. That tree had seen more life than she could ever control. And now it would see more. Forever protected, forever rooted, and, most importantly, forever free of her nonsense. So in the end, Karen moved out.